She pushed one final time, her body screaming in protest, as the doctor placed the crying newborn on her chest. Exhausted, she looked past the medical staff to the observation window. Her wealthy sister was there, beaming with joy, but standing silently beside her wasn't her sister's husband. It was a man she hadn't seen in years, a billionaire who had vanished from her life after a single, fateful meeting. And in that moment she knew nothing about this child, or her life would ever be the same. This is Adjoa, a young woman from a small village, struggling to make ends meet. Her older sister Ifua lived a life of luxury in the city but could not have a child. She offered Adjoa a lifeline, carry a baby for her, and all her financial worries would be over. But the biological father was never Ifua's husband. So who was he? And how did a simple act of sisterly help become a carefully engineered trap? Adjoa's life in the village was a cycle of quiet desperation. Her days began before sunrise, selling vegetables by the dusty roadside, her earnings barely covering her mother's medicine and the rent for their one-room home. The calls from her sister Efua were a monthly reminder of the chasm between them. Efua's voice was always warm, laced with pity, and followed by a money transfer that stung more than it helped. Then one call was different. Ifua didn't just send money. She invited Adjoa to the city. "I have a solution for both of us," she said. The drive to Accra felt like entering another universe. Glass towers replaced open sky. The air hummed with ambition, not crickets. Ifua's penthouse apartment was a monument to polished silence, all marble and vast windows overlooking the Atlantic. Over a meal Adjoa couldn't pronounce, Efua laid out her pain. Years of failed IVF. A silent, crumbling marriage to a man obsessed with an heir. "You see my life," Efua said, her hand sweeping over the luxurious room, "but it means nothing without a child to inherit it." Then came the ask. Not a loan, not a job, a pregnancy. Adjoa almost laughed. It was absurd, but Efua's proposal was meticulously crafted. It would be a closed legal surrogacy. Adjoa would live in a private wing of their home with the best care. In return, Efua would pay off all their family's debts, buy their mother a proper house, and set up a trust for Adjoa's future. It wasn't an offer. It was a rescue package wrapped in a sister's plea. For weeks, Adjoa wrestled with the ghost of her sister's life. She saw her mother's tired eyes, felt the weight of a future with no doorways. The guilt of refusing a sister in need, mixed with the shame of selling her own body, became a knot she couldn't untie. Ifua applied gentle, constant pressure. "It's just biology," she'd say. "You're giving me a gift no one else can." The contract arrived. 50 pages of clinical language. It designated Ifua and her husband Kofi as the intended parents. All donor material would be anonymous and screened. Adjoa's rights would terminate at birth. A lawyer Ifua paid for breezed through it, pointing to the staggering sum in Clause 4B, enough to change 5 generations of her family's fate. Adjoa signed. She told herself it was love. It was sacrifice. The fertility clinic was the most sterile place Adjoa had ever seen. The doctors spoke to Ifua, not to her. During one examination, as Adjoa lay on the table, she overheard a nurse outside the door. "The donor profile for the Mensa case is exceptional," the nurse murmured. "The genetic screening results are unlike anything on file." Efua quickly shut the door, her smile tight. "Just standard talk," she said. The embryo transfer was successful. Adjoa moved into the penthouse, into a beautiful, lonely, gilded cage. Her body was no longer her own. It was monitored, discussed, managed. Kofi, Efua's husband, was a distant, polite man who seemed more interested in his stock portfolio than the pregnancy, but he was always there for the important scans, his expression unreadable. Halfway through the pregnancy, Adjoa found a crumpled memo slip in Efua's home office wastebasket. It was a reminder for a bank transfer with a reference number and a name she didn't recognize. Mensa, retainer fee, clinic coordination. When she asked Efua about it, her sister snatched the paper, her composure cracking for a single, terrifying second. "It's nothing," Efua snapped. "The accountant handles these things. You shouldn't be digging through trash." The final months were a fog of isolation and swelling anxiety. Adjoa's only solace was the baby moving inside her, a feeling that became increasingly complex and painful. She was bonding with a child she was contractually obligated to hand over. The lavish nursery being prepared down the hall felt like a monument to her coming loss. On the morning of the delivery, as the contractions sharpened, Efwa was a vision of calm efficiency, but Kofi was nowhere to be found. A business emergency in London, Efwa explained, not meeting her eyes. At the private hospital, Ajoa was rushed into a delivery room. As the pain peaked, she looked up through the window into the observation lounge. Efwa was there, as expected, but the man standing next to her, his hand resting on her shoulder, wasn't Kofi. It was a man Ajoa had met only once, 7 years prior, at a university career fair where she'd been serving drinks. He had been a keynote speaker, a self-made tech billionaire named Amara Mensah. He had asked her name, he had remembered it, and now he was here watching her give birth. The world narrowed to that window, the pain, the doctors, the crying newborn on her chest. It all faded into a silent, screaming haze. Amara Mensah, his face, older but unmistakable, was a key turning in a lock she never knew existed. Efwa followed his gaze, saw Ajoa staring, and her perfect smile froze into a mask of panic. Then the curtain was yanked shut, blocking the view. Recovery was a blur of hushed voices and avoided eyes. The baby, a healthy boy, was kept in the nursery. Efwa explained it was standard to let Ajoa rest, but the nurses seemed tense, following specific instructions. When Ajoa asked to hold him, a kind-faced nurse looked pained. "Your sister said it would be easier for you if we limited contact," she whispered, before hurriedly leaving the room. Efwa visited alone, without Amara. She was all brittle cheer, talking about the baby's features, how strong he was, how grateful she was. She never mentioned the man in the window. When Ajoa finally voiced the question, her voice trembling, Efwa's hand tightened on her purse. That was Amara, a business associate. He was supporting Kofi, who couldn't be here. Don't be dramatic. The lie was so thin it was insulting. Ajoa remembered the memo slip. Mensah, retainer fee. A cold dread began pooling in her stomach. The pieces, once separate, started drifting toward each other. The anonymous donor, the exceptional genetic profile, the billionaire who remembered a server from 7 years ago. 3 days later, they discharged her. The baby would stay a few more days for observation, Efwa said. The drive back to the penthouse was silent. Ajoa's body felt hollowed out, aching in a way that went beyond physical. Her room, once a gilded cage, now felt like a crime scene. She waited until Efwa left for a charity gala, an event she'd previously insisted Ajoa attend. Now, she was told to rest. The moment the door clicked shut, Ajoa moved. She went straight to Efwa's home office, the one with the locked filing cabinet. The key was in a hollowed-out book on the shelf, a secret she'd accidentally discovered months ago. Her hands shook as she opened the drawer. Files were neatly labeled: fertility clinic, legal contracts, financials. She pulled the financial folder, bank statements, wire transfers, and there it was, not a memo slip, but a confirmed transaction. 6 months before the embryo transfer, a payment of $200,000 from Mensah Holdings to New Dawn Fertility Partners. Memo line: Donor Protocol S77 and Coordinated Services. Donor Protocol S77. She frantically searched the clinic files. Behind the official patient paperwork was a separate, confidential dossier, and there on the donor genetic and psychological profile was a code S77. The name field was redacted, but the attached, non-identifying biography was a detailed list of accomplishments: self-made tech billionaire, philanthropist, graduate of specific universities. It was a portrait of Amara Mensah. The final piece was in the legal folder, a sub-agreement, signed by Efwa and Kofi. It was an addendum to the surrogacy contract, stipulating that in the event of marital dissolution, full custody of the child would revert to the biological father, whose identity was held in escrow by a law firm. Kofi had signed away paternal rights before the child was even conceived. Ajoa sank to the floor, the papers scattering around her. It wasn't an anonymous donor. It was a specific, premeditated choice. Her sister hadn't just wanted a baby. She had brokered a deal. Kofi got to save face with an heir without the genetic link. Ifua got her social status and a powerful ally in Amara. And Amara, what did he get? The memory of the career fair surfaced, sharp and clear. He had been surrounded by people, but his eyes kept finding her as she passed with a tray. He'd stopped her, taken a glass, and asked, "What's your name?" "Ajoa," she'd said. He'd repeated it, smiled. "A name with strength, don't waste it here." She'd thought it was an odd, condescending remark from a rich man. Now it felt like a claim. He hadn't just remembered her, he'd tracked her. He'd used her sister's desperation and her poverty to orchestrate a connection that would bind her to him forever. The child was not a gift for Efua, it was a tether to Ajoa. A week later, the baby came home. Efua named him Coffee Jr., a cruel joke. Ajoa watched from her doorway as Efua fumbled with the baby, her movements stiff, lacking the instinctive ease of a mother. The baby cried, a sound that lanced through Ajoa's heart. Efua looked up, saw Ajoa, and her expression hardened. "You should go for a walk. The air will do you good." It was a dismissal. Ajoa walked the manicured streets of the wealthy neighborhood. Feeling like a ghost, her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered. "Ajoa," the voice was calm, deep, familiar. It was him. "I trust you are recovering well," Amara Mensah said. The casual intimacy of it stole her breath. "How did you get this number?" she whispered. "I've always had it," he replied. "I understand this must be confusing. But the child is healthy. That's what matters. You've done something extraordinary." "Where is Kofi?" she demanded, ignoring his tone. "Efua's husband is where he needs to be," Amara said, his voice cooling slightly. "This arrangement protects everyone. It gives Efua what she needs. It gives the child a life of immense privilege, and it ensures he has a meaningful biological connection." He paused. "You will be taken care of, Ajoa, far beyond the terms of that contract. But you must be patient, and you must be discreet." He hung up. The call wasn't a clarification. It was a warning. She was now a loose end in a billion-dollar secret. When she returned, Ifua was waiting in the living room, the baby asleep in a bassinet beside her. "We need to talk about your departure," Ifua said, not looking at her. "The doctor says you're healed. The village is best for you now. Clean air, your mother." Ajoa stared at her sister. "You're sending me away after I gave you your son." Ifua flinched at the word son. "He is my son," she corrected, her voice sharp. "And you're a surrogate. The contract is fulfilled. The money has been transferred. Staying here complicates things. For the baby's stability." Ajoa looked at the sleeping child, her body aching with a need to hold him. "I want to see the birth certificate," she said suddenly. Ifua's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because I carried him for 9 months. I have a right to see his legal name." It was a bluff, a desperate grab for any piece of truth. Efua stood, her composure finally shattering. "No, you have no rights. You signed them away. You are nothing to him. Do you understand? Nothing." The venom in her voice confirmed everything. The guilt Efua had buried was now rotting into hatred for the living reminder of her deception. That night, Ajoa packed the few things she'd come with. She also packed the photocopies she'd made of the financial transfer and the donor profile. As she zipped her bag, she heard a soft cry from the nursery down the hall. It was a sound that bypassed all reason, all contract, all fear. She crept to the nursery door. The night nurse was asleep in a chair. Ajoa stepped inside, her heart hammering. She looked down at the baby, Kofi Jr. In the soft night light, she studied his face, and she saw it. Not Efua, not Kofi, the faint, unmistakable curve of his brow, the shape of his eyes, they were hers. But the set of his jaw, the mouth, it was the echo of a face from a business magazine, Amara's face. In that moment, the final wall crumbled. This was not her sister's child, this was their child, hers and Amara's, a life created not from anonymous science, but from a billionaire's calculated obsession and her own vulnerable body. The contract, the money, her sister's lies, it was all scaffolding around this one, terrifying truth. She reached out, her finger brushing his cheek. His crying stopped. He turned his head toward her touch, a primal calming reflex, a bond no piece of paper could sever. The night nurse stirred. Ajoa fled back to her room, the phantom feel of his skin burning on her hand. She couldn't leave. "Not now," But staying meant living in the lion's den, surrounded by people who saw her as a problem to be managed. She had the evidence, but who would believe a poor, uneducated surrogate against a billionaire and his socialite accomplice? She needed leverage. She needed to understand the full architecture of the trap before she could break free. The next morning, she told Efwa she would leave by the end of the week. She played the part of the tired, compliant sister. Efwa, relieved, became almost kind again. Ajoa used that time. She listened, she watched the staff, she noted the security routines, and she made a decision. She would not run back to the village to disappear. She would go to the one place where money and power might still be held accountable, the press. But to do that, she needed one unshakable piece of proof. She needed a DNA test. And for that, she needed something they would never voluntarily give. The plan was terrifyingly simple. She needed a saliva sample from the baby, a used pacifier, a drool-covered bib, anything that contained his DNA. The nursery was monitored, but the night nurse had a predictable pattern, a 10-minute break at 2 a.m. to smoke by the service entrance. Ajoa watched the digital clock in her room, each minute a hammer strike on her nerves. This wasn't just about proof anymore, it was the first shot in a war she didn't know how to win. At 1:55 she slipped into the hallway, barefoot on the cold marble. The penthouse was a tomb of shadows and expensive silence. The nursery door was ajar inside. A soft nightlight glowed. The baby Kofi Jr. was sleeping soundly in his crib. On the dresser lay 2 clean pacifiers, but she needed one he had used. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on a small woven laundry basket. She sifted through it quickly, her fingers closing around a damp burp cloth. She stuffed it into the pocket of her robe, just as she heard the soft click of the service door closing down the hall. The nurse was on her break. Back in her room, she sealed the cloth in a plastic bag. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The next problem was the test itself. She couldn't walk into a lab. Amara's influence was everywhere. She found an online service that promised discreet at-home paternity testing. She used the last of her personal savings to pay for it, giving a fake name and having the kit delivered to a post office box in a busy market district, a 2-hour bus ride away. 3 days of unbearable tension followed. Ifua was planning a lavish christening, a public unveiling of her son. The guest list was a who's who of the city's elite. Amara's name was at the top. Ajoa understood the performance. It was the final sealing of the lie, with the biological father presiding as an honored guest. The test kit arrived. Following the instructions with meticulous care, she swabbed her own cheek, then carefully cut a small stained square from the burp cloth. She mailed it back, a tiny envelope containing a seismic truth. The wait for results was an agony of paranoia. Every look from Efwa felt like an accusation. Every ring of the phone made her jump. When the email arrived, the world stopped. The subject line was clinical. Genetic analysis report, case number 88902. She opened it. The summary was a blunt, scientific hammer. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The man listed as alleged father was a match. Amara Mensah was the father. But as her eyes scanned down the page, another line made her blood run cold. The report included an optional, broader ethnic ancestry breakdown. The baby's profile showed a very specific genetic marker, rare in West Africa, but prevalent in a particular region of the Ivory Coast. Amara's family's ancestral homeland, and then she saw it. In the detailed notes, a single, almost throwaway line. Subject exhibits a carrier status for a rare, non-symptomatic genetic lineage marker inherited paternally. It was a piece of Amara, embedded in the child's very code. This wasn't just a paternity test, it was a branding, a permanent biological signature of his orchestration. Armed with the report and her photocopies, Ajoa made her move. She found the contact for an investigative journalist, Nana Brew, known for taking on powerful figures. She used a public computer at an internet cafe to create a secure, anonymous email. She wrote a concise, factual summary. Attached were the redacted paternity report, the bank transfer, and the donor profile. She hit send. The feeling was less of relief and more of stepping off a cliff. The reaction was not what she expected, silence. For 2 days, nothing. Then a reply, your evidence is compelling, but taking on Amara Mensah is complex. He owns part of my newspaper's parent company. I need corroboration from inside. Do you have access to the surrogacy contract addendum? The one with the custody reversion clause? He was interested, but he was also afraid. And he was asking for the one document she didn't have a copy of, the original signed addendum she'd only glimpsed. Getting it meant going back into the office, which was now likely locked down. But Efua, stressed by the christening preparations, had become careless. Ajoa overheard her complaining to the event planner about a misplaced file for the caterer. "Everything is in that cabinet. I can never find anything," she'd snapped. The key was probably still in the same book. That night, after another tense family dinner where Ifua discussed table placements with Amara over speakerphone, Ajoa made her decision. She waited until the early hours. This time, the office door was locked. Her heart sank. But then she remembered the balcony. Ifua's office had a sliding glass door that connected to the main terrace. It was usually locked from the inside, but the cleaning staff sometimes aired the room out. She slipped outside into the cool night air, the city lights sprawling below. The terrace was vast, with potted trees and loungers. She moved silently to the glass door of the office. She pressed her face against it, cupping her hands to see inside. The filing cabinet stood against the far wall. She tried the handle, locked, but as she turned, her robe's belt caught on the door's handle, jerking her back. There was a faint click. The latch, weakened or improperly engaged, popped loose. The door slid open an inch. She froze, listening. Only the hum of the city. She slipped inside. Using the light from her phone, she went straight to the book, found the key, and opened the cabinet. The legal folder was there. She found the addendum. But as she was about to close the drawer, another label caught her eye. Mensa, long-term arrangement. Her breath hitched. This was new. She pulled it out. It wasn't a contract. It was a series of proposals, emails printed out, between Amara and Efua. The language was cold, transactional. Amara outlined ongoing access protocols for the child. Quarterly visits guaranteed inclusion in his will, contingent on the child carrying the Mensa name socially. And then the most chilling part, a draft trust fund document for Adjo with stipulations. It was titled the AM Quietude Assurance Fund. The funds would be released in annual increments on the condition of her continued discretion and non-interference. It had a clause about geographic relocation. They weren't just sending her back to the village. They were planning to buy her silence in perpetuity, turning her into a permanent pensioner of their secret. But one email sent from Efua to Amara stood out. "She is asking questions. The window incident rattled her. I'm managing it, but your continued presence is a risk. Can we accelerate the timeline for her departure?" Amara's reply was succinct. "Patience. The bond is the point. She stays until after the christening. Her distress is a calculated part of the adjustment. Do not mishandle her. The bond is the point." The words echoed in the silent room. He didn't just want a child, he wanted a mother connected to that child, a mother who was emotionally bound, vulnerable, and permanently under his thumb. Her pain wasn't a side effect, it was part of the design. She took photos of everything with her phone, her fingers icy. As she slid the files back, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. She killed her phone light, ducking behind the desk. The door handle to the office jiggled. It was locked from the inside. She heard a frustrated sigh, Ifua's voice muffled. "I must have left the key in the study." "Forget it, I'll get it tomorrow." Ajoa waited, crouched in the dark, for what felt like an eternity. When she finally crept back to her room via the balcony, dawn was tinting the sky. She had everything. The addendum, the damning emails, the trust fund proposal. She sent it all to Nana Brew with a single line, "This is the architecture of the trap." The journalist's response was immediate. "This is explosive. I can run it, but you need to understand. They will come for you the moment it publishes. You need to be somewhere safe with the child before I hit send." The christening was in 48 hours. It was the one time the baby would be in a public, albeit controlled space. It was her only chance. She wrote back, her plan forming in fragments of desperation. "Get ready to publish. I will have the child with me when you do." She was no longer just fighting for truth. She was planning a kidnapping from under the noses of a billionaire and her own sister, at a party with 100 witnesses. The war was no longer covert. It was going to be a very public detonation. The chapel was a symphony of whispered wealth. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the guests in hues of gold and blue. Ajoa stood at the back, a ghost in a simple dress, watching her sister hold the baby at the altar. Ifua glowed with performative grace. Amara Mensah stood as the honored godfather, his expression one of serene ownership. The priest began the blessing. Ajoa's phone, set to silent, vibrated once in her hand. It was the signal from Nana Brew. The article was live. For a moment, nothing happened. The ritual continued. Then, like a ripple through still water, a soft buzz spread through the pews. A guest glanced at their phone, their eyes widening. They nudged their neighbor. A murmur rose, cutting through the priest's words. Heads turned, not toward the altar, but toward Amara, then toward Efua, then searching the crowd. The headline was brutally clear: Billionaire's secret son, the surrogacy scandal that bought a sister's silence. Efua, sensing the shift, tightened her grip on the baby. The priest faltered. Amara's composure was the first to fracture. He subtly gestured to a security detail near the door. Their eyes scanned the crowd. They were looking for her. Ajoa moved. She walked down the side aisle, not with haste, but with a terrible calm. All eyes were on her now. The murmurs died into a shocked hush. She reached the altar steps. Efua's face was a mask of pure horror. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "I'm taking my son," Ajoa said, her voice clear in the silent chapel. "He is not your son." Efua's shriek echoed off the stone. She clutched the baby, who began to cry. Amara stepped forward, blocking Ajoa's path. His calm was gone, replaced by a cold, controlled fury. "This is not the place, Ajoa. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Walk away now, and we can still honor the arrangement." The arrangement where my distress was a calculated part of the adjustment. Ajoa said, quoting his own email. The gasp from the crowd was audible. She looked past him to the frozen guests, to the journalists now frantically filming on their phones. "His name is not Kofi Jr. His father is Amara Mensah. My sister sold my womb to him, and they planned to pay me to disappear." Chaos erupted. Guests stood. Security surged forward, but they were blocked by the press, by the sheer density of scandal. Cameras flashed. Efua, trembling, tried to back away, but Ajoa was there. She didn't grab. She simply reached out her arms, her gaze locked on her sister's. In that shattered second, something primal passed between them. Efua saw the ruin of her own life, reflected in Ajoa's eyes. Her arms went limp. Ajoa took the crying baby, cradling him against her chest. The world shrank to his weight, his scent, his reality. Amara barked an order, but his security was overwhelmed. The story was already viral. The evidence, the contracts, the emails, the DNA, splashed across the internet for all to see. The fallout was swift and merciless. Police, prompted by the public outcry and the evidence of fraud and coercion, intervened. The christening became a crime scene. Efua was taken in for questioning, her social life evaporating in an afternoon. Amara retreated behind a wall of high-priced lawyers, but the damage to his reputation was profound. His company's stock plummeted. Ajoa did not go to the village. With the help of Nana Brew and a human rights lawyer, she and the baby were placed in a secure location. The legal battle was long and ugly. Amara's lawyers argued the surrogacy contract was valid. Ajoa's team argued it was founded on fraud, coercion, and the intentional concealment of the biological father's identity. But in a quiet meeting, away from the courts, Amara made a shocking offer. He dropped his custody claim. In exchange, he demanded legal recognition as the father, with guaranteed visitation rights. He also offered a genuine, no-strings-attached trust for the child and a separate fund for Ajoa's education and well-being. It wasn't generosity. It was a strategic retreat to salvage a shred of connection and avoid a trial that would dissect his obsession in public. Ajoa, after weeks of counsel, agreed. She would have primary custody. The child would know his father, but on her terms. The money would secure his future. She named him Ni, meaning high-born, not for wealth, but for the undeniable strength of his true origin. The final surprise came from an unexpected quarter. Kofi, Efua's husband, reached out. He had known, he confessed, he had agreed to the charade to preserve his own standing, but the public humiliation had shattered him. He provided a sworn affidavit supporting Ajoa's story, detailing Efua's and Amara's negotiations. In return, he sought a swift, quiet divorce. His testimony was the final nail in the case's coffin. Efua, stripped of her marriage, her social status, and the child she'd schemed to possess, retreated into obscurity. The luxury penthouse was sold. The sisterhood was a scorched battlefield with no hope of rebuilding. Adjoa moved into a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, not with wealth, but with security. She enrolled in courses, determined to build a life she owned. Some nights she would wake from a dream of that dusty roadside market, the smell of vegetables and desperation. Then she would walk to Niai's room, watch him sleep, and feel the solid, terrifying weight of a future she had chosen, not one that had been engineered for her. The bond, as Amara had coldly calculated, was indeed the point, but it was not the instrument of control he had intended. It became her anchor, her reason to fight, and the source of a love that was entirely, fiercely her own. The trap had been sprung, but she was the one who walked out of it, holding the very thing they had used as bait. Now, the story of that fight and the profound question at its heart belongs to all of us. So what does this story leave us with? It's more than a scandal. It's a map of how love can be weaponized, how family can become a transaction, and how the most vulnerable among us are often seen not as people, but as parts in a machine. Adjoa's body was treated as a vessel. Her sister's love was conditional on utility. The billionaire's affection was a blueprint for control. Yet in the end, the most meticulously engineered plans have a fatal flaw. They cannot account for the human spirit's refusal to be a pawn. Adjoa was supposed to be quiet, grateful, and gone. Instead, she became the author of her own story. She reminds us that the price of our silence is always higher than the cost of our voice. This makes us ask a difficult question of ourselves. What would we do? Would we take the money and disappear, rationalizing it as the best for everyone? Or would we stand in the chapel surrounded by power and say no? There is no easy answer because survival and dignity are often in conflict. But stories like this one exist to stretch our moral imagination, to make us look at the hidden contracts in our own lives. If this journey moved you, if it made you think, then you understand the power of a story told with truth. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more untold stories into the light. Thank you for watching, and remember, the most powerful bonds are the ones we choose, not the ones we're forced into.